I am going to tell you this exactly the way it happened, the way I would if I were sitting on your sofa with my knees pulled up under me, mascara smudged, half laughing and half crying while you kept refilling my glass and saying you are listening, you promise, you are not judging, even though we both know you are a little bit. You know how I always said I would never be that woman. The one who sneaks around, who has a second life, who deletes messages and memorizes times so stories line up. I used to say it with this smug certainty, like it was part of my personality, like my loyalty was some fixed structure instead of something that could be bent slowly over time. My name is Emma, and I cheated on my husband with a man who was, technically, hired to seduce me. I did not know that last part at first, obviously. If I had, maybe I would have been more careful, or maybe I would have run even faster toward the danger just to see if I could blow my own life up in style instead of letting it erode quietly. I wish I could tell you I am sure. When Alex and I met, I thought he was the safest choice I could possibly make. That sounds unromantic, but after the chaos of my 20s, safety felt like a miracle. He was a corporate lawyer, the kind who read contracts for fun and carried a lint roller in his briefcase. Tall, carefully put together, always on time. He made reservations weeks in advance, kept spreadsheets for our finances, remembered my mother's birthday without a reminder. He also loved me, in his way. At least, I believe that he did. It was not the burning, inconvenient love that had set my heart on fire when I was 22 and stupid. It was steady and practical. He told me he wanted to build a life with me, said it in that matter-of-fact tone he used when he had decided something and would now see it through. I let myself be folded into that plan like another clause in a contract. We moved into a flat near the seafront, not quite close enough to see the water from the windows, but close enough to smell the salt on damp days. I took a job as events manager at the Meridian, a boutique hotel that wanted to pretend it was in Havana rather than a sleepy English coastal town. There were palms in pots in the lobby and a cocktail list full of words like rum and sugar cane and smoke. The hotel's pride and joy was its music lounge, hidden at the back, no windows, just deep teal walls and warm neon bending into the shape of a saxophone over the bar. On weekends a band played under low, golden lights, and the air turned thick with smoke and conversation. It was almost always full. People liked the way it felt like stepping through a portal into somewhere louder and more alive than the rest of their week. My job was to make sure it all ran smoothly. I booked acts, organized private parties, soothed drunk clients, and put out fires before anyone smelled smoke. I was good at it. I liked the rhythm of it, the way the night had a shape and I could move through it with lists and checklists and a headset if needed. For a while, my life was a neat loop. Work at the Meridian, home to Alex, weekends occasionally spent with friends if he was not buried in a deal. We talked about buying somewhere bigger. We talked about trying for a baby. We talked about taking a proper holiday, somewhere warm where we could both pretend our email did not exist. The key word there is talked. We stayed at the talking stage for a long time. If I am honest, the first betrayal was not a kiss. It was something smaller, so small I almost missed it when it happened. One night I came home late after a gala at the hotel, still smelling of other people's perfume and spilled Prosecco. Alex was on the sofa with his laptop open, his tie loosened. I told him the night had gone well, that the client was happy, that the band had played an encore because the crowd would not let them leave. He nodded, eyes still on the screen, fingers moving over the keys. I realized, standing there with my shoes dangling from my hand, that I could have been saying anything. That I could have told him I had set the hotel on fire or run away with the drummer, and his reaction would have been the same distracted noise. It was such a small moment, but it felt like stepping into a room and finding a window bricked over without anyone telling you. I started staying later at the hotel after that. It was easy to justify. Events run late, guests linger, problems arise. The lounge became my second living room. The staff were my borrowed family. The manager, Ruth, would slide a drink toward me sometimes after closing, something off the menu. The bartenders flirted lightly in that safe, contained way that stays behind the bar. When Ruth told me she had booked a new resident musician for the midweek slot, she was excited in a way I had not seen in a while. She said he was American, that he played piano and sang, that he had one of those smoky voices that made people order a second drink without realizing. His name was Luke. The first night he played, the lounge was only half full. Midweeks are like that, the room breathing more slowly, the regulars staking out their usual tables. It was easier to see everything in that thinner crowd. I stood near the back, arms folded, my events manager posture on, ready to decide if he matched the hotel's carefully crafted atmosphere. He walked onto the small stage in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, sat at the battered upright piano as if he and the instrument were already in the middle of a conversation. He introduced himself to the room, and his voice slipped out low and warm. Then he began to play. He was good. Not just technically, though that was obvious, but in the way he watched the room, adjusting the shape of each song to fit its mood. Old standards, a few things I did not recognize, all of them threaded through with this lazy confidence. When he sang, the room leaned in. Conversations dropped in volume. The warm neon at the bar caught in his hair, making it look darker. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for so long I had forgotten it was there. After his last set, Ruth waved him over to the bar to introduce him properly to the staff. I was there with a clipboard like some cliché, ticking off sales figures. He thanked me for the booking, said he liked the room, that it had good bones and better acoustics than it looked. His eyes were an odd, pale hazel, the kind that changed with the light. He asked if I had been the one to choose the teal paint and the stupid saxophone sign. I said I had fought for the teal and lost the battle over the saxophone. He laughed, and it was a real laugh, surprised and warm, not the polite chuckle I had grown used to from clients and Alex's colleagues. Nothing happened that night. I went home to a sleeping husband and a kitchen that smelled faintly of food he had reheated for himself. But Luke's voice followed me, the way he had stretched a note here, cut one off there, the way he had looked at me properly when he spoke, not over my shoulder. He became a fixture at the lounge. Mondays, Wednesdays, sometimes a Sunday if we needed him. Staff started timing their breaks to his sets. Regulars asked for him. He learned people's preferred songs and their preferred drinks. I pretended I spent more time near the bar on those nights because it was easier for guests to find me. We talked in stolen moments between sets, him leaning on the piano, me standing close enough to hear him over the room. He asked about my job, about how I ended up in a seaside hotel instead of some big city venue. I asked about his life, and he told me pieces, parceled out over weeks. Gigs in different towns, a stint on a cruise ship, a messy breakup he mentioned without details. He never asked me if I was married. He only glanced at my hand once, a flick of his eyes, taking in the ring. He did not comment. That restraint felt like its own kind of attention. At home, Alex grew more distant in ways that were easy to explain individually and damning in aggregate. He stayed later at the office, claimed cases were piling up, partners were demanding. He answered messages at the table, apologized without looking up. We argued in polite, precise sentences that left no marks on the walls and all the marks on my ribs. I found a long blonde hair on his scarf one evening, a color that did not belong to me. It clung there like a thread of light. I held it between my fingers and felt something inside me tilt. When I asked who he had been with that day, he listed colleagues, clients, people in meetings. All women, some blonde. It sounded plausible and empty at the same time. I started taking my ring off at work. At first it was practical. The band caught on things, on tablecloths, on the edge of trays. I slipped it into my pocket and felt lighter without it. One night, Luke noticed the faint indent on my finger. He asked, across the top of the piano, if I played an instrument. I said no. He smiled, not unkindly, and said there were other reasons for marks like that. I felt my face heat. I told him I was married but that lately it felt more like I was drafted into a job than part of a team. He said quietly that sometimes a team could be the loneliest place. That was the first night he walked me home. It was late, a Tuesday that had faded into Wednesday without either of us noticing. The streets outside the Meridian were slick with a recent drizzle. The hotel sign glowed above us, warm neon bending and flickering. He said it was not safe for me to walk alone that late, and I rolled my eyes because I had done it hundreds of times, but I said fine, if it made him feel useful. We talked the whole way. It was only a 15-minute walk, but it felt like a separate little world carved into the night. He told me about the first song he ever played in a bar for money. I told him about the first event I ever ran that did not collapse into chaos. When we reached my corner, we both stopped the way people do when they are not quite ready to let the moment end. He looked at my building, then at me, and he said I seemed like someone who spent a lot of time keeping other people's nights perfect while her own went cold in the fridge. It was such a stupid metaphor that I laughed, but it lodged in me. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I did not. Nothing happened that night. No kiss, no impulsive hands. He nodded, said he would see me tomorrow, and walked away. The restraint made it worse somehow. It left space for my own imagination to play. Over the next month, we settled into a pattern. Work, lounge, conversations, walks. Sometimes we sat in the empty room after closing, the band packing up around us, the air heavy with the ghost of music. He would play one more song, just for me, something softer, unfinished. I sat on a bar stool and let myself feel seen. It was so dangerously easy. The night it finally crossed the line was not dramatic. There was no storm, no shouting match at home, no grand declaration. There was just exhaustion and a tiny, reckless decision to stay 5 minutes longer. The lounge had been rented out for a private birthday. Middle-aged guests, too loud, too drunk, over-tipping to compensate. By the time the last of them stumbled out, it was nearly 3 a.m. Ruth sent the bar staff home early, told me to lock up. Luke was stacking sheet music at the piano, his shoulders slumped. I told him he looked wrecked. He told me I did too. He asked if I wanted a nightcap, said he knew the bar's secrets better than anyone. I told him one drink, then I really had to go. We sat at a small table near the back, the neon over the bar casting red and amber streaks across the empty room. The chairs were upturned on tables, shadows long and strange on the walls. The drink was strong and smoky, with a slice of charred orange. My head felt light, my body bone tired. He asked how things were at home, and I made some dismissive noise. He pressed, gently. I told him about the blonde hair, about the absences, about how Alex had started sleeping facing the wall. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said he was sorry, and I believed he meant it. Then he asked, so quietly I almost missed it, when was the last time I had felt chosen? The answer sat between us like a spilled drink. I could have stood up then. I could have said this was unprofessional, that I was married, that I was tired. I could have laughed it off, pushed it back into safe banter. Instead I said I did not remember. My voice came out raw. He reached across the table and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a shock through me. His thumb traced the pale groove where my ring usually rested. The room seemed to narrow around that single point of contact. I felt my breath catch. He said I deserved more than to be a background character in my own life. He said it like a statement, not a seduction line. That made it more dangerous. I do not know who leaned in first. Or maybe we both did, pulled by the same terrible gravity. His mouth was warm and tasted of smoke and citrus. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, like we were both waiting for the other to pull away and call it a mistake. When neither of us did, it deepened, something hungry and desperate rising up. When we finally broke apart, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. His hand was still on my face. There was a moment of pure, undiluted clarity where I could see exactly what I had done and exactly where I would go if I kept going. I thought of Alex, asleep or not asleep in our bed, his back turned. I thought of the blonde hair on his scarf. I thought of all the nights I had sat at the edge of our sofa, waiting for a conversation that never started. I kissed Luke again. I am not going to tell you every detail after that. You do not need a frame by frame. It is enough to say that what began with that kiss became a pattern. Nights at the hotel that ended with us tangled in one of the unused guest rooms, or in the back office with the door locked and the lights off, the warm neon from the corridor leaking under the gap. I told myself all the usual lies. That it was temporary. That it was just physical. That it did not mean anything about who I really was. That last one was the worst lie. Guilt came in waves. Sometimes it drowned me and I would go home and stare at Alex across the dinner table, sure that he must be able to smell another man's hands on my skin. Other times it faded into the background, replaced by a kind of giddy relief that someone still wanted me enough to press me against a wall and forget their own name for a while. Then, one Thursday evening, everything snapped. I came home earlier than usual for once. There was no event, Luke had a rare night off, and I thought maybe I could use the gap to test the temperature of my marriage, see if there was anything left to salvage. I bought fresh bread on the way, and olives, and a decent bottle of red, as if props could rewrite a scene. When I opened the door, the flat smelled faintly of Alex's aftershave and something else, something sharper. He was at the dining table with a stack of papers in front of him. His tie was off, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly messier than usual. He looked like a magazine spread of a relaxed lawyer at home. The only thing that ruined the image was the envelope sitting in the center of the table, thick and unassuming. He told me we needed to talk. My stomach dropped to my knees. It is amazing how fast your mind can race, flipping through every possible angle, every lie you could tell, every partial truth. Before I could say anything, he slid the envelope toward me. Inside there were photographs. Printed on glossy paper, edges sharp against my fingers. The first was of me in the lounge, head thrown back in laughter, Luke's hand on my waist as he leaned in close. The second was in the corridor outside the guest rooms, my back against the wall, his body pressed to mine. The third was the worst, taken through a sliver of space in a door frame, both of us in a tangle that was unmistakable even though skin and fabric blurred together in shadows and red light. I felt the blood drain from my face. My first ridiculous thought was that the pictures were unflattering. My second was that someone had been watching us all along. Alex watched me with a calm that was more frightening than if he had shouted. He said he had hired a firm months ago. Not a divorce lawyer, not then. A private agency that specialized in testing loyalty. He said he had been certain something was wrong, that I had become distant, secretive, that my hours had stretched. He said he did not want to confront me based on a feeling. He wanted proof. They had sent Luke. That was the part that made me feel physically sick. The knowledge that the man who played me songs in the empty lounge had walked into my life as an assignment. That, at least at the beginning, he had been following instructions, not his heart. Alex said the agency used contractors. Attractive men and women with acting skills and clean backgrounds, people who could be placed in plausible positions around the target. A bartender, a fellow commuter, a new neighbor. In my case, they had chosen a musician at my own hotel, a man who could be there late at night without raising suspicion. At some point while he was talking, my vision blurred. I gripped the edge of the table to stop my hands from shaking. I wanted to deny it. To say that Luke had just appeared, that our connection had been organic, a coincidence. But even in that moment, pieces began to click into place. The way he had known exactly what nights to be there when my manager had been struggling to book acts. The ease with which he had slotted into the hotel's aesthetic. The way he sometimes seemed to know my schedule better than I did. I asked how far it had gone. How much of my life Alex had paid someone to dissect. He said the contract had been for 3 months of observation, with the option to extend if inconclusive. They had provided reports. Photos. Logs of my arrivals and departures. Notes on who I spoke to, how long I stayed in certain rooms. He said his intention, originally, had been to get clarity. To see whether I would take the bait, and if I did, to free himself from the marriage without the burden of uncertainty. I asked, with a voice that did not sound like mine, if he had read all the reports. He said yes. It was the quiet that broke me. The idea that while I had been wrestling with guilt in dark hotel rooms, He had been sitting somewhere reading bullet points about my movements like they were case notes. I asked about the blonde hair. About his late nights. About Lila, the name I had seen flash on his phone once with a heart next to it. He flinched slightly at that, the first crack in his composure. He admitted that while the loyalty test had begun with me, it had not ended there. That in the process of watching me, he had given himself permission to do his own experimenting. Drinks that turned into dinners, flirtations that turned into something more. He told me he had never planned to be the one who cheated first. It had just become easier to justify once he had the idea of my potential betrayal to hide behind. So there it was. We had both been unfaithful, but I had been cultivated like a test subject while I thought I was simply falling in love, or lust, or escape, with a man who played piano under warm neon lights. The next day, I went to the Meridian and asked for Luke. Ruth said he had called in sick. Her tone was wrong. Too neutral. I felt the panic rise in my throat. I went down to the lounge anyway. It was empty in the harsh daylight, chairs upended on tables, the saxophone sign dark. In the small back office, his bag was gone. The sheet music was gone. The coffee mug he always left by the piano was gone. There was a single envelope on the desk with my name on it. I knew before I opened it that it would not be enough. His letter was longer than I expected. He wrote that when he took the job, it had been just that. A job. He had been given a file on me, photos, notes about my schedule, about my marriage, about the hotel. He had been told to get close enough to know whether I would step outside my vows if given the chance. There were guidelines, ethical phrases designed to make it sound less vile. He had told himself he could do it, that it was no different from any other role. He wrote that he had not expected me. The late nights, the humor, the way I watched the room as if it were alive. He said he had tried to keep it light at first, to steer me toward a harmless crush that would fizzle out. That when I told him about the blonde hair, about the way Alex had turned away from me, something in him shifted. He had been through something similar once, he said. He had watched someone choose safety over him. He had promised himself never to be the tool used to hurt someone else again. He admitted that the first kiss had been a betrayal on multiple levels. Of his contract, of my marriage, of his own supposed ethics. After that, he said, he had gone back to the agency and tried to quit the assignment. They had laughed. They had told him he was over-identifying with the subject. They had reminded him of the money. He wrote that he had stopped sending them updates. That was his small act of rebellion. He stopped replying to their messages, ignored their calls. He hoped, stupidly, that if he starved them of information, the whole thing would fizzle out and no one would get hurt except him, when I eventually went back to my life and he left town. He had underestimated how thorough they were. There had been cameras, he wrote. In the lounge, in the corridors, even in the fire escape. Ones I had never noticed because they were small and well placed. The agency had access to the hotel's security system as part of an unrelated contract with the owners. My bosses had signed off on it as a cost-saving measure. No one had thought about how the same cameras that watched for theft could also watch for desire. They had not needed his reports in the end. The pictures on my kitchen table had not come from him. They had come from lenses in the ceiling, from long lenses across the street, from strangers whose names I would never know. He ended the letter by saying he was sorry. That he knew the word was useless in the face of the damage. He said that what he felt for me had become real in a way that terrified him, and that he had chosen to run rather than give Alex or the agency any more power over us. Us. As if there was an us anymore. I crumpled the letter in my hand and then smoothed it out again. I wanted to burn it. I also wanted to frame it, as evidence that I had not invented the tenderness between us, even if its origin had been transactional. The aftermath was quieter than all the build-up. I left the Meridian. Officially it was a mutual decision. Off the record, Ruth hugged me in the loading bay and whispered that she had had no idea and that if she had, she would have smashed the cameras herself. I believed her. I also knew that the hotel cared more about its relationship with the agency and the absence of scandal than about my bruised heart. Alex and I separated. There was no single fight that ended it. Just a series of practical conversations that felt like negotiating with a colleague rather than saying goodbye to a lover. We divided furniture, bank accounts, blame. He offered, almost clinically, to support me financially while I figured out what to do next. I declined, partly out of pride, partly out of the desperate need to have something that was not touched by his spreadsheets. I moved into a smaller flat further inland, on a street where no one knew me as the woman from the Meridian. I found work managing events for a charity, daytime things with name tags and bad coffee. No teal walls, no neon, no piano. I blocked the agency's number. I never found out their name. Alex offered it once, said I could go after them if I wanted, could tell the story to some journalist and make a scandal. I imagined my face in an article about loyalty tests gone wrong, about women turned into case files. My stomach turned. I said no. Sometimes I dream about the lounge. In the dream, the room is empty. The neon flickers, casting red light on vacant chairs. I walk to the piano and see fingerprints in the dust, as if someone has just lifted their hands. When I look up, there are cameras everywhere, hanging from the ceiling like ornaments, all of them pointed at me. You might be expecting me to say I have learned my lesson. That I will never cheat again, that I will never trust again, that I have rebuilt my life on honesty and solo therapy sessions and yoga. The truth is grayer. I have learned that betrayal is not a single sharp moment. It is a network. Alex betrayed me when he hired strangers to test my heart instead of talking to me. I betrayed him when I kissed Luke in the warm glow of the lounge instead of leaving the marriage that was already cracking. Luke betrayed both of us when he took the assignment. He also betrayed the agency when he tried to sabotage the job for my sake. We all stepped into roles that made sense at the time. The loyal wife, the suspicious husband, the charming stranger. We all let those scripts guide us until they ran out of pages. The part that scares me the most is not that I cheated. It is how easy it was to justify. How quickly I reached for the narrative that I was the wounded party, that I was simply taking something I was owed, that my loneliness was a kind of permission. If you take anything from this, let it be this: the moment you start telling yourself that your needs do not matter enough to be spoken aloud, you are halfway to betraying yourself. After that, betraying someone else feels like a smaller step. Sometimes, very late at night, when the city is quiet and my little flat feels like a stage set rather than a home, I put on old jazz records and close my eyes. If I listen carefully, I can almost imagine I am back at the Meridian, the air thick with smoke, the clink of glasses, the warm neon painting everything in forgiving colors. I can almost see Luke at the piano, head bowed, fingers moving over the keys as if he is praying. In those moments, I let myself grieve the version of me that existed there. The woman who walked through the lounge with a clipboard and thought she could manage other people's chaos without ever letting her own spill onto the floor. The woman who believed that loyalty was something she could measure in hours spent at home versus hours spent under someone else's hands. I am not asking you to excuse what I did. I am not sure I excuse it myself. I am asking you to see the whole picture. Not just the glossy photos in an envelope, but the camera behind the camera, the man behind the piano, the woman behind the event schedule who was, for a little while, both the subject of a test and the architect of her own undoing. And I am asking you, if you ever find yourself sitting in a bar under warm neon lights, feeling seen by someone who is not the person you promised your life to ask yourself a question I never did in time. When did you stop being honest with yourself, long before you stopped being honest with them?